Testing. Check 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Check 1.
Yeah. You got enough of that? Sounds
Check
good.
1. Check 2.
Hi, I'm Mike Harland, and I am here with a very special guest, Dr. Al Mohler from Southern Seminary. Dr. Mohler, welcome.
Mike, it's great to be
Thank
with
you so much for being here. Today at Lifeway Chapel, and you may not know this, but every 2 weeks we have a chapel here at Lifeway, and we have wonderful speakers and guests that come that we are in ministry partnership with you and are with. And Dr. Mohler, you certainly are one of those. We've looked forward to you being in chapel today, and it was a wonderful message about sowing the seed, which we're going to talk about worship. So
All right.
I'm going to just, very unscripted here, this is not prepared, but I want to ask you, Dr. Mohler, when you think about what you just shared about our responsibility of being seed sowers, where does the worship ministry fit into that? What does the worship ministry of a church, what's their responsibility in seed sowing?
Yeah, I want to step back a moment and say that I think the most important act of worship is actually preaching.
Yes.
So preaching is not something that follows worship. It is actually the climactic act in which God's people are now ready to hear the Word of God.
Yes.
But worship isn't standing alone. That is, preaching is not standing alone. It's in the context of worship. And so I think it's all about sowing the seed. I think every prayer we pray should be not only an act of adoration and praise, but also embedded with the gospel.
Yes.
The music we sing is a part of sowing the seed. And as a matter of fact, the music we sing is so important because sometimes that's what people remember. What comes to their mind, and maybe in a moment of crisis, maybe in a moment of sorrow, is something that will often come with the tune. I think God made us that way.
I agree. And we often say, we tell our audience all the time that music is not our message. It is only our language, and that the message is the gospel. And,
Absolutely.
And I think what a wonderful tool we have, as you've just referenced, the music memory aspects of where it goes into the soul of a person, into the psyche of a person. So thank you so much for sharing that. And worship pastors, I would say, we're listening to one of the men that are leading churches and developing pastors say that our commitment to the gospel is the same commitment that our pastors have when they declare the gospel as preachers. So
can I make a musical extension of that?
Please, love for you.
I think that those who are in charge of the music and leading the music need to keep a couple things in mind. One is that we often make a distinction between more classical or traditional music and more contemporary music. That's the wrong dichotomy.
Yeah.
I think the dichotomy is between shallow and deep and between thick and thin music.
Yes.
And that has to do with tune as well. So if you look at the old hymnal, the hymns have names, the tunes have names.
Sure.
And some of them are repeated, but not very often. And there's incredible diversity in meter and structure, not to say in melody. And that's lacking in a lot of what's called contemporary music, where they all sound so much alike. It is much more difficult for words with music to take residence in the heart when all the tunes are basically the same.
Yes.
And so that's an argument for richness and depth, thickness, and in melody, some distinctiveness that helps the heart.
Well, that's fascinating. I'm really glad you added that. Now, Dr. Mohler, you have a voice into the modern church about the modern church in today's culture. I listen to the briefing. I'm one of those people that do that, and the insights that you bring about what a New Testament church looks like in postmodern 2016 America. So what would you say musically to that? Because music is a cultural thing. We're impacted by the music culture, and yet the church has an unchanging gospel. You may have just answered the question that I'm asking with what you just said, but how do we balance the cultural aspects of music but remain true to the gospel?
I'm with my wife, Mary. We're members of a church in Louisville. It's a church that was dying years ago and is now filled with people, and it's filled with young people. We are kind of the old people in the room. But the music is traditional hymnody. And so that kind of breaks some expectations that we have younger people, must be very contemporary. Well, there's some contemporary aspects of it. The argument I'm trying to make is that it doesn't really matter what the label is. It matters what the content is. And we are living in times of vast change. And, every church in every generation eventually starts to learn to speak the language of the culture around it, and that's going to include a musical culture.
Yeah.
But the question is, what are we speaking? Now, there are all kinds of complications with this. Are there some musical structures that are incompatible with the gospel? Well, certainly there are some that are, and there's certainly others that will come very close because you simply can't communicate a coherent message. And the gospel is always a coherent message.
Yes.
But we still have learned a lot in terms of contemporary music structures and opportunity and styles. So it's to me, I want to go back, it's a matter of how much is here being communicated. How great is the God about whom we're singing? How much of the gospel, and that just not means the mood of the gospel, but how much of the content of the gospel is actually being articulated in song in such a way that the congregation's eagerly singing it. Mike, that's another issue for me. We've got to remind ourselves that the proof of whether or not Christ's people are worshiping is seen in whether or not, when it comes to music, they're actually singing, not being sung to.
Yes.
And that I think is the biggest problem in so many contemporary churches, where it's become performance from the stage. And there's every good reason to have talent, and to have that talent in leading in a good biblical scriptural fashion. But I was with Alistair Begg some years ago, and he told me that the test for his church and whether they were actually worshiping was whether men and boys were singing. Now, the reason he said that gender specific is because women and girls are more likely to sing. But if you've got boys and men singing, something really healthy is happening.
Yes.
And that's singing, not just watching.
I agree. It's one of the things we talk about when we talk about the essentials of worship ministry is the congregation engaged, not just watching something. They're there to do something, not watch something.
It's the congregation's voice.
Absolutely. I've been in the role I'm at here at Lifeway for about 11 years, and I've watched a real interesting transition at Southern Seminary in the area of music. And by the way, I'm a big fan of what you guys are doing up there. Love Joe Kreider and Chuck Lewis and Greg Bruton.
They're doing a phenomenal job.
They're phenomenal guys. Yeah. But your approach academically to preparing people that are going to be using music in church work is unique. And in the sense that it's now part of a biblical studies program.
That's right.
So talk a little bit about the approach.
There's a history here,
and why you've done that.
And when I tell this history, it's not to dismiss what came before,
right?
Because we learned a lot through that.
Sure.
And a lot of churches were served by that. Southern had one of the first graduate schools of church music in America, and it was modeled after Westminster Choir College, which is affiliated with Princeton. So it was very formal, high church, a more classical model. It was about pipe organs and massive choirs and anthems and all of that, and of course hymnody. And I have to tell you, Mike, I love it. My wife and I, that's where we are absolutely at home.
Yes,
I feel the loss of it, but I am the president of a seminary, not the curator of a museum. And our task is to serve churches, and we were not serving churches well. Because that was implying something about worship and music that the local church was not going to be able to fulfill, nor did it feel that was its mission. So we started back at ground zero and said, okay, well, if we were going to rethink this, we're going to make worship and music an extension of the biblical teaching ministry of the church and the biblical counseling ministry of the church and the missionary effort of the church. So it's going to be an organic biblical and theological emergence. And then we're going to bring in the very best musicians who are also the most faithful theologians and servants of the church. And then we're going to put it together as if we're starting all over again and trying to figure out how to do this. And the Lord's just blessed beyond anything you could have imagined. Yes. And we see the proof in the fact that these are graduates going out who are really leading churches, leading the people of God in worship. And they see how that fits in the larger biblical and theological context. They see how that fits in the larger scheme of Great Commission ministry. They see how that fits in the context of God's gathered people in worship and in preaching. And it's been a lot of fun.
I'm convinced the call God put on my life
Uh-huh.
was a call to make disciples,
Right.
not to make
Absolutely.
music. And,
That's right.
and that music was just a language to know well and to be able to
And a
articulate.
God-given langue
Yes,
of profound
exactly.
importance. And let me tell you something very happy that
Yeah.
has come in the midst of this. We did have to close a formal school of church music and go through all that would entail and start all over again. And people said, "Look, you're going to lose your student body. You're gonna lose your opportunity to draw students. We now have more students in this new program than were in the old school of church music." And so that's just to say the Lord's greatly honored it, and
awesome.
beyond anything we had imagined.
Well, Dr. Mohler, thank you again for spending this time with us. Thank you for what you're doing to train next generation church leaders in the area of music and in all the areas that Southern Seminary serves so well. It's been an honor to have
We
you
are
here
thrilled to
today.
be in partnership with Lifeway.
Thank you so much.